Good afternoon. My name is Savannah Chin. I'm joined by Kendall Reed, Misha Lawrence, and Ingrid Rojas. We'll be presenting our solution to the case twist. Just as a recap, the FRC has targeted 4 routes, mainly the Northwest, California, the Northeast, and the Midwest. FRC has $8 billion per year to spend on the high-speed rail program. Current limitations are one of the current rail programs has to be completed by 2020. The FRC cannot subsidize the whole construction of any given project, and the states must cooperate and support any given high-speed rail program. We will be considering each of the routes based on community development and financial planning. Those are 2 out of the 4 criteria that we used. The other 2 were management structure and safety. But given the grant process and the fact that grants are approved for the projects, we're assuming that the safety measurements and management structure requirements have been met. Just to recap, also, we had a point system involved. The points are weighted in terms of political and social values. Therefore, community development and safety are weighted a little higher than financial plan and management structure. Obviously, our scores are not out of 100. They're out of a wider range to accommodate diversity in grant applicants, and there's a minimum requirement in each criteria. Some more assumptions that we made. All the stops listed on the map were the exclusive list of stops that would be created or developed on each rail line. The lack of information supplied for the specific criteria meant that there's no substantial difference between the routes. So this meant for safety and for management structure. The grant approval signifies that as I mentioned, grant approval already satisfies the safety and the management structure requirements. With our funding, we wanted to prioritize Tier 1 areas to maximize benefit. This includes major cities, and that came into our consideration. And finally, our last assumption is that's still 2009, and Governor Schwarzenegger is still in office. I can click for you.
I can do it.
You sure?
One other thing that I'd like to mention, going back one.
Back?
Oh,
Let's
yeah,
see
back. Okay. Tier 1 issues. The main difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 regions was speed and population density, just for your information. Okay, so our primary recommendation is California, and our point system recommended this one as 45 points out of 80 total possible points. The other cities actually scored pretty close to this, but California did win out at 45 points. Some of the issues that we talked about when we were determining this were the informational market, and what that is dealing with is the fact that California's economy is based more on an information system, which is important because research shows that an industrial center may struggle more when it's compared to an information-centered market. As the transfer of information within a person's body, you can get on the train, you can take that service that you have inside your head, your abilities to sell yourself are easier to transport than, say, machining equipment. Ridership was a big issue in California when compared to some of the other regions. Points of access and reducing isolation are both related in that they're trying to shrink the map and bring areas together, which California does pretty well as compared to some of the other population densities. Scored pretty close to New York, the Northeast area. Construction impact was a big topic and very important because both the Northeast and California are heavily urbanized areas, and so as you construct a rail line through these urban areas, you're going to have to deal with that issue. California seems to be a little bit better prepared to deal with that and able to mitigate those factors because its population is not quite as dense. And then, of course, financial planning was the other area that other area of criteria that we have. So we have cost per mile per rider. That figure for you. So the Northwest cost per mile per rider was about 19 cents per mile per rider. The Midwest was about 38 cents. The Northeast was $6.97, and California was $2.77. Now, this comparison would obviously lead you to believe that the Northwest would be the ideal target, but when compared with those other issues of population density and ridership ability, California did actually win out. Total miles, just for your information, were pretty much the same for the Northwest, for the Northeast, and California. They all range around 450 miles. The Midwest was actually down around 284 miles. Okay. So benefits of California route, we're trying to solve capacity restrictions and high congestion. And research is important here in showing that these types of areas are the ones that benefit the most, which California meets these criteria, and so does the Northeast. But again, those construction costs are a mitigating factor. There are increases to tourism and land value. You might notice land value there for California. California has high land values already. But one of the things that this allows is people that are forced to live close to the city, allows them to move out a little bit farther and increase those land values out a little bit farther from major cities. California also was a primary choice because it avoids the interstate coordination issues that the other areas had. And in fact, the Northwest was even worse with an international boundary. It has a stronger service economy than the other choices, with the exception of perhaps Seattle and the Northwest area. But again, there are mitigating factors there. And then, of course, a high profitability margin with a high ridership and an information economy. Okay. And then cost of California route. So, of course, with any build like this, you're going to have negative effects involved. And one of those is medium-sized cities, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. Traveling through major urbanized areas is, again, just that conversation about the impacts of construction in an area. It is not the highest level of ridership. That would be the Northeast. Again, those construction costs are a major mitigating factor. Because you're traveling, you're building through those urbanized areas, and pretty much everything in the Northeast is urban, everything. And then again, there are those figures for the cost per mile per rider.
Okay. Related to the other corridors, each one of them has pros and cons. The first one is the Midwest, and it has no added cost for upgrading trains and equipment. However, it is important to mention that all the corridors require investment in railroads. As for the negative externalities, this is the corridor with the shortest distance, and because several states are in this corridor, this might imply transaction costs because of the coordination efforts between different states. The second one is the Northwest Corridor. This has the lowest cost per mile per rider, and it also has no added cost for upgrading trains or equipment. And in addition, because this one doesn't have any major city in the route, it does imply a low national security risk. As for the negative externalities, there is low riderships in this corridor because there is only mid-congestion areas. So there will be no environmental boost in this option. Also, it is important to mention that it can be seen as a betrayal for the local economy since the Boeing company is located in this corridor. And the last one is the Northeast Corridor. This is the one that connects several major cities with high volume of travel among them. Then there is a strong environmental impact expected in this corridor. However, since there are too many states in this corridor, this might lead to complicated jurisdictional issues. And it's also worth mentioning that this is the one with the highest cost per mile per rider.
So, in conclusion, California, we believe, is going to be the most feasible option. We'll see this because of the comparable ridership numbers as compared to the Northwest and the Midwest. Also, we felt that in terms of Tier 1 categories, that California and the Northeast were the ones that were most comparable to each other. So in comparison to the Northeast, we'll find our ridership numbers to be comparable and our costs to be lower. We'll also find that we've expected, in terms of this will also provide the highest short-term profitability. And that's because of the increased political backing that we have in California, because their bonds have already been issued, and in terms of financial profitability, we wanted to make sure that the Northeast, as compared to California, could carry that burden. We didn't feel like the Northeast would be able to get that, would be able to acquire that considering the interstate relationships that they'll have to engage in. Also, we feel that this plan will meld well with our phase development requirement that we had in the initial plan. Phase development will require that in urban areas, particularly, that they will need to complete one part of the project, then receive funding for that project, and continue on into different phases. We think that California's model will be modeled best with this. Also, community support was something that was rated highly in our, that was weighted highly rather in our proposal for grant applicants, and we feel like California will score highest in community outreach, considering again that they do have the support of the governor's office. They have, the community has voted on the bond issue for this project, and we suspect that they would vote for a higher bond issue to continue expanding this project.
We're ready for any questions if you might have them.
I can start. You had said at one point midway through the presentation that this could have a negative impact on mid-sized cities in California. If you could just elaborate on why that would be.
Well, the research has shown that high-speed rail does not always increase the economic development within a city as compared to, we can compare the high-speed rail system in Spain, where they saw that areas where there were mid-level cities on the same route as a higher level city. So if we're comparing France to Medellin, they saw higher benefits in Paris. They saw higher benefits in Paris than they did in Medellin, and in some cases they saw where the economy in Medellin went down as a result of the high-speed rail.
Would that be different in California versus the other four corridors?
Yes. Well, in the Northeast, we saw that, and again, we were comparing primarily California to the Northeast because we thought that was in the same tier, that those were all major cities, or most of the routes on that, most of the stops on that route would be in major cities. So you would see more of a boost in those major economies as compared to the California route, where you would see there are smaller cities on that route.
We thought that there were also some mitigating factors because of the information style of the economy that might help in that situation.
One of the questions I have is, I think you determined that you wanted to go with the California project because it scored 45 out of 80 points.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how you determined that the California scored 45 points.
Okay, there was a point system that we didn't actually show here on the slide. What might be of interest is that the other cities all scored very close. They were all right around 40 until you added in the 30%, 20%, 20% factors, so the weighting issues, at which point California jumped ahead because of commercial development being a weighted area.
So I guess as a follow-up, why is community development in California better than community development in the Northeast?
It has mostly actually to do with that information style economy, services, as opposed to an industrial.
So, sorry, as a further follow-up, if the Northeast had more information-based economy and if California is more manufacturing-based, you would recommend the Northeast then? Is that a
That
fair
would be the
assessment?
idea, yeah.
Okay.
And there are hopefully some mitigating factors coming up in New York's future. I know, for example, recently Albany, New York had, I want to say it was Intel is building a factory there, $14 billion or something along those lines for nanotechnology.
We did also consider the higher cost per mile in the Northeast, and that number was closer to $7, whereas the California number was closer to $2. So when we weighted those figures, that also brought the comparison between the Northeast and California.
Absolutely.
Why spread it out?
So I'm really interested in this weighting system. Do you have the scores for the other cities or the other regions?
Well, the scoring that we did was primarily only a community development financial plan because we didn't have information for the safety or management structure. But the scores ranged between 40 and 45.
Mm-hmm.
So they were
Okay.
relatively close.
Yeah, and one thing that should be taken into account is that some of these factors would kind of balance out because of how the point system is designed unless we did use the weighted areas. For example, areas that scored low in one area might score high in another area for the exact same reason. So, for example, if you have an area that has a very strong urban environment that is going to be very profitable, isn't as needy as an area that wants to really grow its economy. So you can have these balancing factors that we were trying to mitigate.
So 45 was California
45 is
out
California.
of 80.
Yeah.
That's like B minus. Is there like
not
a
really a grading system?
Yeah, no, I mean, but I'm making light of it. But like, does it tell you anything that there wasn't like any, if they were all sort of bunched together in the 40s? Does it tell you anything that there wasn't like one slam dunk, like
Well,
50,
again,
60, 70?
that was the 40s was before we applied the weight to it. California was actually still in the lead even before we applied the weighted.
Okay.
But it is a comparable scale so that it will show you how states will compare to each other or regions will compare to each other as opposed to having benchmarks. There are benchmarks in each category. You have to score a certain amount of points. So for this example, each region would have needed to score 30 points. And then so we could really say this is a net score of 15 points above the minimum as compared to the other regions having 10 or 11.
And we can give you access to those numbers later.
Thanks. Any other questions from any judges?
Yes.
What about the kind of transportation culture? California is known for a lot of cars. You mentioned congestion. But if people prefer to drive their cars by themselves versus where there's more train use in the Northeast? As far as the comparative.
I think with the trains, if they're traveling at high speeds and traveling between major metropolises, you'll have a shift from people driving their cars to switching over to trains, especially if the option is available. I mean, there was an article that trains were often disconnected. You'd have to take a train to connect to a bus to connect to another train, as opposed to if there's one high-speed train that travels, like takes you from where you are to where you want to be, then it makes it more convenient than driving. And also, I mean, the trains will become more and more efficient as more and more travel is shift to riding the train. So you'll have fuller trains that'll be more efficient in terms of having them travel up and down.
And really, another issue that goes along with that is that in this particular case, these trains are traveling long distances. And cars are really a matter of convenience. And if a person really needs to have that ability to go from office A on this side of town to office B to office C, then they have to have that flexibility. Then obviously the train isn't going to work. However, if you're going from point A to point B on the train route.
So you think it'll replace air transportation more than
Yeah.
car transportation?
And that's what we had also seen in the other models that we compared this to in France and in Germany, that in areas where there were long distance travel routes, that ridership went up exponentially because of the high-speed rail. Thank you.
Thank you.